Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about do-it-yourself travel planning.
Yeah.
So here we are. Cindy and I love to do planning. I mean, honestly, I can spend so much time planning my trips, thinking about my trips. Sometimes I feel like I spend 6 months planning for a trip in the fall, and then, there's less time I actually get to enjoy it. So that planning is a big part of enjoying the trip for me.
It is. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think I enjoy planning as much as going on the trip because you're like
Yeah.
deep diving into places. I really get into that part of it. But for some people, they haven't planned a trip or they are used to going on trips that other people plan, right? You take a tour. And so planning a trip on your own sounds a little intimidating, but it's really not. It's a ton of fun. Um,
Oh, it's a lot of fun, and
yeah. And
once you
it's,
get started, it's kind of like putting a puzzle together because there's
yeah.
a lot of different pieces and there's a lot of different things. And for some people, that can be exciting. And I know for some people it is, it kind of gets overwhelming.
Mhm.
So we're here to offer some just tips on how we put it together and maybe
And
some of the order and hopefully give you guys some suggestions that will be valuable.
yeah, just like where to start. What do you want to do when you want to plan your trip? Because it offers an opportunity to make it your trip. I think that's the reason that I typically lean towards planning my own because I feel like it's really all of the things I want to do. It's a little hard sometimes to find a pre-packaged deal where it's doing
Yeah.
everything I want. It's like half of it I want and the other stuff I'm not interested in. I have these other things I want to do. So planning my own just gets me to be more selfish. It's all my stuff.
Yeah. No, I
But
think that's why I always want to jump in and plan it too, because then I know I'm including things that I want to make sure I'm going to see, get to do all of that. So I think the big thing you first need to think about when thinking about planning a trip is why.
right.
Why do you want to go? What's the purpose? Is it to go to a specific event? Is there a specific state or country you want to go to? Is it a natural phenomenon? Is it a concert or a museum opening? I mean, it can be a multitude of different whys, like why and what your purpose is.
Yeah. And I think, really reflecting on, you might say, I really want to go to Germany, but you need to stop and say, why do I want to go to Germany? And what do I want my experience to feel like? And I think a lot of times we forget about that. It's like, oh, I want to go to Germany. And then you just sign up for a tour and you go, and it's not what you wanted. And that it doesn't mean it was wrong. It just wasn't what you were wanted. It wasn't resonating with what you were expected. So I do think understanding your purpose. Am I going because I'm curious and I want to discover new things? Am I going because I want to connect with my culture and, there's a heritage piece to this? I need to relax. Maybe I need time off. I'm actually taking time off work and I just want to like zone out and not have to think. Maybe you want to sit by the pool. Like, what is it that what do you want your experience on a daily kind of basis for those 5 or 15 days that you're going to be gone to feel like? And I think that's the first question you have to do. And I think a lot of people skip that.
Oh, I think so too. And I think we get hung up on the where a lot of
Mhm.
times instead of the actual purpose. Like you said, it's like we see something beautiful. We see someone posted an amazing photo from even Iceland or Hawaii or, Peru, Machu Picchu, and we get hung up on this destination. And
Yes.
then we're just like, how do I get to Machu Picchu? Or when can I go to Iceland? And
Mhm.
that takes over instead of really thinking like, well, what do I want to get out of going to Iceland? And
Mhm.
what's my point? How do I want to feel when I'm there?
Yeah, and kind of what's my day going to be structured like? I mean, you might see something, I really want to see that, but you know, I want to see, the puffins, which is what I want to do in Iceland. But I don't want to be cold. It's kind of like, well, you probably can't, because it's going to be cold outside. And even in the summer, it's cold there. So there are things that you have to like understand if that's what you want to do. There are things you won't necessarily get to do if you do that. And also just because you want to see the Eiffel Tower in Paris doesn't mean that you want to be there in that spot in Paris the whole time you're there. You can go for an afternoon and see that thing, but then you have 6 or so days. What are you doing the rest of the time?
Right.
So having boxes to check as far as I want to see that, that's lovely that you have places you want to. We all do, like you want to actually see them with your own eyes, the things you've seen in books and
Yeah.
movies and so forth. But the rest of the time, like, how do you expect that to feel?
Right.
And I
Exactly.
think once you understand the purpose of what you're trying to do and what you want to feel, then things start to fall into place. And I think doing a little soul searching, the next question is like, who are you going with? Which is, I think you need to ask, are these the right people to go with to have that experience? It's another question, right? Or
Oh,
who
I
should I
think
go with to have that
right.
experience?
Right. I think that's a
Right.
big piece of it. And sometimes, as I know you've shared in the past too, Cindy, it's like maybe you've had this idea of going to Machu Picchu or Iceland forever and ever. So you're always kind of looking then because you want to go with someone. And sometimes you just got to change that up and go, you know what? Life is passing by.
I'm
And if
gonna
I just
go.
got to go. And so I have to convince myself I can do this. And I think once you do that, and I think, I always use Rick Steves as an example because I know my friend Sheila and I often talk about this. We went to a travel show, we heard Rick Steves. I had never planned a trip outside of the United States on my own, but he gives it a very empowering talk that like you can go, you can do it, and you
Yeah,
just educate yourself, learn a little bit of the language,
right.
you can do this.
You
So
can
it's
do, and other grown-up adults do it all the time. We
right,
can do these
exactly.
things. And uh, maybe your trip is about the person, right? So sometimes the trip is about wanting to spend time with your family. Sometimes you want to go somewhere with a partner or with a girlfriend, like you just want to share something, and that is what you do when you travel with a friend or a family member, is you get to share some beautiful things with them. But deciding that that's the purpose, that the purpose is to spend time with this friend, that'll change how you experience the trip and what it will change where you stay. I know when I'm coaching folks about travel, if you're going with a family, staying in a hotel is bad juju. Like if you want to spend time with your spouse or you want to spend time with your children, you need to be in a place where you have a family room, where you have a place
Right,
to relax, and whether that's in a lodge or a bed and breakfast, or whether that's staying in an Airbnb or some sort of vacation rental, you will have you have more opportunity to do what you wanted to do by staying in a
right.
different place and giving yourself those spaces to have those moments. So really thinking about who you're going with and why you're going. And those two are very closely tied together typically. Sometimes it's just go by yourself, as you said, April. Like, I just want to go there.
Yeah,
No one wants to go. I'm packing my
right.
bags. I'm going. I did that. Just do it.
Right. But yeah, the who becomes then the piece that you need to think about. If you want to, as you said, spend time with family,
Mhm.
just go on your own and you
Uh-huh.
need that time alone to recharge. So
Mhm.
the purpose then is very much tied to, because then it's all the other things will start to fall into place. Like where you stay is going to vary differently if it's just you're trying to find a space for, or if it's a group of people, if it's a
Yeah.
family that you want to have interactive time and have a
Yeah.
space to do that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my son is coming back to visit from Japan. He's coming home for a couple weeks, and I was just talking to my daughter about what we should do when he's here, because I want to do something with him when he's
Yeah.
here. But as we were saying, I want it to be something that is more like mulling around, because I really want to talk to him too. So
Yeah.
I don't want to go to the movies per se, or a performance
No.
where we have to sit in silence. So it's like, although those things sound interesting, that's not the kind of event that I want to take him to. I want to take him to something that's more, we can see things, but it'll inspire conversations and so forth. So I'm actually thinking about, the purpose of how I want to spend my time with him. And I think it's the same thing when you're traveling. You need to think about what you kind of want to take away from it so that you plan the right activities. So, now the next thing is, how long are you going to be gone? Right? Those are,
Right, right. And
um,
sometimes if you've got like a commitment to a
mhm.
job or a business or family commitments, you can only, that how long
Right.
may be kind of predetermined. Like in the United States, we often talk about how little vacation time a lot of companies and businesses give their employees. So you might be
Yes.
stuck to like, I only have a week. Well, then that helps you with laying out the other things because your purpose, if it's to spend time with family, that may, you're going to need to build in some time to allow those interactions. So you don't want to be trying to just check off a list and hit too many places. So you have to be
Right.
mindful of that. Whereas if it's just yourself, again, it may vary. Maybe you do want to like, hey, I only get this week. I want to see as much of this country or place as I can.
Right.
versus, you know what, I need to like just unwind. I just want to stay
Mhm.
in this one place. And if I
Right.
get up each morning and just have my notebook, my coffee, and a view of the beach or whatever it is for you, that's
Yeah.
enough. And then that
Yeah.
changes the planning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're, describing of thinking about the purpose and who and the when, how long and when you're going, those are like the boundaries or the box that your trip fits in. And so now there are things that'll be like, well, that doesn't fit in the box because it's not in November when I can travel. And it doesn't fit in the box because, like with my son, it's like, that's a lovely thing to do, but it doesn't give us room to talk. So so I start throwing those things out
Yes,
and
exactly.
throwing the things in that fit within the timeline with fit with who I'm going with. I mean, maybe you have a family member, an older family member who has a mobility issue, so you can't do the long hike, or you have young children who can't be out for, 10 or so hours. That's gonna, they're gonna be exhausted. So again, things that get thrown out of the box and thrown in depending on
Right.
what fits. And so I think when you're planning, you really need to know what those limits are, what your boundaries are for your trip. There's a couple more on our budget. Budget is a boundary
Budget.
too.
And budget
Um,
is a boundary. I mean, most of us, 90% of us, don't have just unlimited budget. So budget does come into play. And sometimes, as we're seeing, and year to year, that piece can change, of course.
right,
But like this year, airfare is super expensive or gasoline is super expensive. So now, that comes into play when you're planning like where, maybe how far, how long,
right,
those types of things. What kinds of activities? Maybe the event costs X and you want to make sure to be able to do that. Then
right.
that only leaves this amount down here. So yeah, budget is very much another
It's
kind of like boundary, you know?
Yeah, it's going to tell you I can't stay in that particular Airbnb because it's too expensive. That's going to run my bill up too much, or I'm not going to be able to do that cool activity that sounds really amazing because it's just too expensive for my personal budget. There are different things. So
I kind of like to think of the budget as kind of almost like a speed limit because, as you and I, Cindy, often talk about, I think sometimes we allow that too much to be a roadblock when in fact it's just a speed limit. It's like maybe I can't do it as I imagine, but maybe there's a way to be creative and still do and go and spend time with my family, but I just have to get more creative in my approach, whether
right,
that's looking when I'm working with clients too, sometimes they're looking at going to a location like New England. They want to go during fall foliage. It is very expensive right away off the bat. But by just being, a lot of times they're like, oh, well, now I might not be able to go because of the money. And I'm like, no, we just have to rethink it. Maybe you go stay in an Airbnb. Maybe you look at areas where it's a big ski area and no, they're not skiing in October. So those condos, people are leasing those and letting them go for a few days because they're sitting empty.
yeah.
Or
So,
maybe you can find a hostel in some of the larger communities in that area and use that as a base and changing your thinking that a hostel doesn't always mean just 20-year-olds
right.
party like crazy and staying up all night. Do your research and
Yeah.
reach out, but
Mm.
that's just kind of a speed limit.
Yeah, it does. It definitely changes. And you do have to start to get creative. And I think when you start to look at your budget and then you start to and it happens to all of us, like, oh my God, I can't do all the things I want. But if you've already kind of described in your head, at least your purpose, you can come back and go, but the whole purpose was like to relax or was to
Right,
spend time with this family member. I don't need a lot of money to do that. Like I can
right.
change how I do that. And if you want to see the fall colors, you don't need to go to all the like big hot spots that, some
Oh,
travel advisor has told you have to go to. You could go to some little tiny podunk little village and stay in a little place and then drive around a little bit. You could have a better
yes,
time than anybody else
right. Oh,
because you're not
exactly.
with all the, the madness of the tourists, and you kind of gotten away from it and you still get to see it, but you're seeing it in a different way, not in the way that,
Right, that the
everyone else is
magazines
doing.
are
Right.
feeding it to you. And I try to communicate that often that there are ways, and it's not, don't use that as like, oh no, I can't go this year. I waited too late to plan. No, there's
No.
still places and ways to make it work. You just have to be willing to be creative and you also have to be willing to maybe change a little. Yeah, maybe you
Right.
need to drive a little further to stay out in the country, but as you said, you might have a more amazing
Better time.
experience than being with the hordes of people that are all in the hot spot
Correct.
as such. So it's
Correct. And
just,
you may happen upon like I have like the best place for pie in the whole
yeah,
world. It's like, oh my
exactly.
God, I had no idea that these places existed. And I think the last thing we added to our boundaries is the where. And I it's funny that that ended up last when we were talking earlier this morning, because it's really doesn't matter where. Travel is amazing. Where may actually be one of the first things for some people, because you really just want to go to Iceland, just want to go to
Right.
Japan. Like these are, you have a place that you want to go to. But all the other things are, I think, equally important. It's what pulls the thing that your trip planning together, and it gives you some structure around it. So if you don't know by that time where, then you have to pick a where, because you
Yeah.
can't start planning until you have a where. But
Right. But the where might be really tied to the purpose. If your
yeah,
purpose is to see the northern lights, then it is as a exploration of, where can I see the northern lights, or
right.
where can I go see the animals, the lions and tigers and the Great Migration, if that's something that appeals
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, and I see people post, I just want to get, somewhere where the weather is lovely and I want to sit by the beach. Okay, well that there's a lot of them, but that does still narrow it down, right? You're
Right.
not going
It
to go to
does.
the mountains in France. That's not going to be that. So if you do can narrow it down, but you need to have those things. And I think I'm just going to recap. We have know your purpose, who you're going with, when and how long, how much money you're going to
Yeah.
spend your budget, and where you're going. And once you have that, that is really that box that your trip fits in. And some of that might be a little flexible, and you might find yourself sliding around on that. Like I have been on some things like moving my trip dates to fit where I want to go and what I want to experience. But those, some of those will be more anchored. Like I am going with this family member and we can only spend this much money and we can only go on these dates. So then all the other stuff is movable, but kind of figure it out. Maybe it isn't who you go to. I do, I want to go to Germany and it doesn't matter when I go, but I absolutely want to see this, museum.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you know what's movable. So that'll help you start to structure it. And then what's the first thing we do
Yeah,
once you
you
got all that?
almost, once you have all that, I really think for both Cindy and I, we talk about airfare, and I always advise other people to like secure, if it's somewhere you need to fly to, if you've
Mhm.
decided that's how you're going to do the trip to get to X place to maximize your time there, check out the airfare and start, even if you don't book it, have it, be watching it, be mindful of it. I
Mhm.
do see sometimes people posting now, and things are fluctuating again, depending on what year it is, what's going on with the airlines. These are always moving targets. Sometimes there's not really a magic potion as to
No,
picking the best airfare, but there is, like especially in the current situation we're in, if you book now a year in advance, you're probably not going to get the best deal. So if you can
right.
hold off, wait
Mhm.
on that and watch it.
Yeah. I think somewhere between 8 weeks, like 2 months, and 6 months is about the right amount of time to book. And part of me booking in advance is because I, need to plan the other things. Because when you're looking at flights, like, do I need another night in the hotel because my flight's
Right.
not leaving until the morning, or am I going to leave the night before? Like, or is it easier for me to stay 2 more days because my ticket now is $500 cheaper? Like
Yeah.
all of those kinds of things, matter. So having the flight actually booked is another bookend, right? It's like it starts
Right.
here, it ends here, and I can start to fill in the stuff there. But I also think once you get close to 30 days out from your trip, the flight fares go up. So you need to book it about 6 to 8 weeks for sure. And I think somewhere around 6 months is the soonest I would book it. I don't think I would book flights
Yeah, that's
much
what I
more
mean.
than six
I
months in advance.
Yeah, I just saw that recently on a forum or board that someone was thinking about buying their ticket a year in advance. And I don't think I do that in the current
I might if it were a
situation
really
or,
good deal. Like if I saw the deal of a lifetime and it's like if you buy it now, you can go to Paris for $200.
yeah,
I would go, sure. Um, but
right. Don't pass those up. But if it's
yeah,
still kind of like, again, that's where doing your research comes in, and you can go into Facebook groups or other forums on the big, like TripAdvisor, Photos, Frommer's, they all have like forums, pop in
Right.
there, Twitter even. And
Uh,
yeah, if you see a great price, by all means grab it. But on the other hand, if it seems a little high, ask others, like, what do you typically pay for this route? And
right.
some sites do kind of give you those parameters, like wait, hold, or you'll see the little
Yeah.
arrow like buy now. There's lots of apps and places too you can kind of sign up to get some parameters on airfare.
Yeah, but you do need to know like the airline or the airport for sure, like which airport you're going to fly into, or at least a couple of options so that again, you get those are your bookends too. If I have to come in at this airport, I need to figure out how to get, where I'm going to go, and maybe
Right.
it's cheaper to fly to this airport, so that, it might change things. So that's one of the first things. And then you start to look at your activities and where you're going to stay. Like then you're going to, and that is puzzle pieces, right? Like I want to
Yeah,
do
exactly.
this, but there's a lodge over here and they're not close. So maybe I need to find something close, or I want to stay here. What am I going to do around there?
Right.
Right. So I use a map. I don't know about you, but I start to like map. That's the first thing I do is start putting
Oh,
lodging and activities on a map.
yeah,
Physically.
I always grab a paper map, and you
Uh-huh.
can always usually get those, if you're in the United States, places like AAA, or even if you go online, you can still order. Thankfully, you can still order a free paper map from most states. And same thing, I use the lodging as kind of bookends.
Mhm.
Again, it's like because often depending on where you are, you can then find things to do outside of that, unless there's a specific thing. Like I know I want to go to the Eiffel Tower, well, then I
Right.
may want to stay closer to that. Or maybe I want to investigate, well, how expensive is it? So now budget comes into play, and I'll stay a little further out, but where's the train station? Or do you want
Yeah.
to be close to that? So I definitely, activities and lodging kind of can interchange, but after airfare, that's the next thing I take care of.
Yeah.
And depending on what kind of lodging, oftentimes you do want to book quite a ways in advance, because
And when you're
sometimes,
going, yeah,
yeah.
if you really want to stay there. Um, and you were mentioning maps. So if I'm going to a different country, or a paper map is not readily available, I mean, I just printed out because I'm planning my Iceland trip. I just printed out like just the outline of the Iceland
Oh,
country on
yeah.
a piece of paper, and I have it laying here. I was looking for it. It was on my desk, but I think I moved it for some stuff we were doing this morning. And I just start putting I look it up on the map online. I'm like, oh, it's about there, and I just scribble on my notes so I know like these things are close together. And if I were going to a city like Paris or New York, I might print out, go
Oh,
online and
yeah,
find something I could
definitely.
print out just on a piece of paper and just start scribbling. This one's here, this one's here. I look it up on the map because knowing your proximity allows you to build your itinerary, if you will, right? You can't do these
It
things
really
at the same
does,
time,
right. Yeah,
right?
exactly. And it
um,
is important to get a paper map, whether you pull it offline or something you can physically look at, I think is much easier to get the whole picture.
yeah, as a matter of fact, as we're talking, I also use Google Maps. I create my own Google map for an itinerary. Maybe we could do a session on how to do that, because that is so cool to be able to like just look at my whole map, my whole trip on Google Maps.
Oh,
It's
I love Google Maps.
Yeah. Because I can create my own and then I can save it and then I can take it with me on my trip. I can pull up all the lodging and it shows me where all the places I'm going to stay, just the things I'm doing, which is fantastic. But definitely start looking at that. And that's when you have to, sadly, when you're planning, you have to have some give and take, right? Because you can't do it all.
Yeah, you can't do it all. No, exactly. But it is important, as we're talking, to then really think through, because I think sometimes knowing the country, I mean, people have that issue when they're coming into the United States too. I often run into people that are like, oh, I want to see New York City and then go to the Grand Canyon and go to the Redwoods. And they're used to Europe. Maybe if they're coming from Europe, things are much more compact over there. Whereas the United States, it's like, you only have a week, you're not going to be able to make all that. It's not like,
You can't
you
even
know,
travel that
you
far, even
can't
if you
even
were
travel
flying.
that far. So, again, this is where you got to like educate yourself a little bit, find out your travel distances. Even in New England in the fall, I bump into this where it's like, these things are they don't look far on the map, but there's not a good route. There's not a good interstate. There's not a 4 lane I-5 like we have in Southern California to get you there at 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. You're down to 35, 40 miles an hour. So your distances are just reduced so much differently.
I'm glad you brought that up because distances are different from country to country and from neighborhood to neighborhood. And like in Costa Rica, we had the same thing because we looked at the map and we're like, oh, that's only say 50 miles apart. But when I researched it, they were like, that's 3 hours away. And I'm like, but it's 50 miles. And they're like, yeah, but we
Yeah.
don't, the speed limits in Costa Rica are not 70 miles an hour. I think the fastest you can go even on their highways is like 50.
Wow.
And, we're talking about different quality of roads and all
Yeah.
of that. So when you change, how you drive and the type of the quality of the roads and the straightness of the road, right? Like you said, the
Yeah.
I-5 in California just goes straight north and you just, and it's a big wide open road and we're going 70, 80 miles an hour. You can get 50 miles in an hour. Easy.
Yeah,
Never a
easy.
question, right? But in some other places, 50 miles might be a 2 hour drive. And it's
And
just,
it Yeah, and it
even in
even
Los Angeles,
I was
it's
just gonna bring that up, even in
traffic.
LA, right, traffic, which we run into. People think, "Oh, I
Mhm.
have a day, I wanna come to
Yes.
LA, I wanna do Universal Studios, I wanna go to Hollywood, and I wanna go to Santa Monica Beach." It's not gonna happen. I mean, I've been in Santa Monica, as you have too, City. It's like if
Yeah.
4 o'clock hits, you're gonna take it could take you hours to move your car from your spot just down to Abbot Kinney to have dinner. I mean, you might as well just start walking at that point. I mean, it
You
literally you're
should.
literally just not moving. And I think
Yeah.
people don't realize that about some cities. I mean,
Yeah.
Boston, the same thing. It's like you don't want to have a car in Boston, even
Yeah.
to take an Uber. I was
Yeah.
in Boston and I got released from having a treatment, on my wrist. And it's like, I looked at it and I'm like, I could see the traffic. It was just like
Uh-huh.
wall to wall. I'm like, you know what? I need to just start walking. I'm going to get there much quicker.
In big cities, that's true. I mean, I live like
Or
seven
even New
minutes from
York.
downtown Los Angeles. It's like with no traffic. And again, that would only be like at midnight. So if I drove in the middle of the night, I could get there in just a few minutes. It's because it's literally just a couple of miles. I can walk there if I adventurously wanted to do so. There's some hills, but in the middle of the day on a work day, it can take over an hour to go what is less than 2 miles.
Right,
And a
right.
lot of people don't understand that. And, we happened to us in Vietnam, and I've had traffic in Costa Rica, where because they also have those, they don't have a big wide lane highway, right? It's 2 lanes,
No.
one going this way and one going that way. And in Vietnam, we almost missed our bus. I've told that story before, but it was because in front of us, there were some construction trucks and there's no place to get off. So
No.
everyone is backed up for miles waiting for those trucks to do whatever they needed to do. So, and we had a similar thing happen in Costa Rica because again, it's just 2 lanes. And when something's happening on the road, we were got out of our cars
Yeah, you're
and
just
wandered
right.
around because we were
Exactly.
stuck there.
You're
We
just
were looking
stuck
for
there.
food to eat. We're like, it's lunchtime. We haven't eaten. What are we going to do? Because driving is different and it depends on what you're doing. So you do need to look at the distances, do a little research about how you're going to get from point A to point B, be flexible. I think that's one of our second points here when you're planning your trip is to try to be flexible. Um,
Yes.
give yourself lots of options. Put your number one choice for lodging, book it, but then list in your planning document and wherever you're storing this. There's lots of ways to do that. Choice B and choice C, so that if something happens, you can switch it up.
Right. Exactly.
Have options of other things to do. I kind of in the past I've made like little booklets because I've printed it out. Now I just keep it online, but I always have my as you're doing research, you find 10 places to stay. You pick
Right.
one, and then I keep the top 2 or 3 listed and 10 places to eat. And then I may only list the 5 that I'm
Yeah.
interested in. But it's good to have options in
It's
case
good to
something
have,
happens.
right. It's very good to have options because anything can change, especially when you're traveling. You might get to a location and something, maybe their plumbing quit working, electrical. I mean, it could be a zillion different reasons where you show up and now it's like sorry, there's not,
It's
you
not
can,
happening.
it's not happening. So you want to have a backup that you can quickly pull up, digitally or in your paperwork and call the next place and try to get yourself always have a backup plan, always be flexible.
Yeah. And I
Um,
mean, I know that sounds like a lot. People are like, oh, I have to pick, and the truth
uh,
is when you're planning, you find 20, right?
right,
And then you start weeding it down and like, this is the one, and just hold on to those other two. That's all you're doing. You actually found 20.
right.
And just keep those in your notes so you don't have to start over, because if you're
Yes.
sitting there and you're like, shit, I know there was a place, and you go back and start looking and it's like, I saw something, I can't remember the name of it. And it's stressful if your hotel is closed, you don't,
Yeah.
it just adds to anxiety. So I promise when you start doing planning and researching, you'll find 20 places you want to go eat to dinner.
Yeah.
And you're going to pick one and just hold on to two or three of them in your notes in case something falls through. And you may not use them, but it will save your day one day.
Yes, it will.
For
So I
sure.
think a couple other planning tips real quick is we've got sketching out your day, at least some bullet points of, morning, midday, and evening. If
Right.
there's something, a place that you really wanted to get into, make sure you look it up, know what hours they're opening, and make plans. Put that
Right.
on one or two of the days at least so that you can be sure that you get to do that.
Right. Because just like having options, the last thing you want to do is, end up in a beautiful place, having a wonderful time. And then it's, you went to the museum or you did that one activity and now you have the rest of the day and you have no idea what to do. So have, some big bulky items of things you can do and list it. You'll find that then you can just pull back your notes and go, oh, there's three things and we're kind of feeling this at the moment. Let's go check this
Right.
out. Yeah. And be a little flexible, but map it out so you don't have to do the research on the road. I know some people do that, but I feel like research on the road is such a wasted of time.
Yeah, I do too, I guess,
Uh,
because I feel like my time was so valuable if I've only got this week and
right,
this, I mean, the hours are ticking, so I don't want to have to spend that time researching. That's why I
right.
spent this hopefully plenty of time ahead of time. And you will maybe take a last minute trip, but still, even when you're on that airplane, then be doing some of these things, make a
Yes.
list quickly,
Yeah.
have things readily available. I mean, there's so many ways now to save that information digitally.
Exactly, exactly. And then, ask locals. I mean, I know we were going to give some tips and I'm going to jump to the locals question is like, start talking to people. Even though you have things planned for the day, be flexible and know that if somebody says, oh, but you really should, go have this meal over here, or you should have this coffee, or the gelato is amazing here, just move your schedule around a few things and go see that thing that the local does. And I know that a lot of people who do travel by the seat of their pants, which is another style of travel. They just, maneuver through that. That's all they're doing is basically asking locals. And instead of doing, what they planned, they just show up and they ask people, where should I eat? And then they go eat.
Right.
That's another way to do it. Absolutely. I like to marry the two together. I like to have some of my own plans and then ask. And then, that way I still see what I had in my
Yeah.
head I want to see, but I give
Right.
myself room and flexibility to talk to locals. And you might cross something off your list because the local's like, oh, that's not really worth seeing. And you're like, oh, well, what should I do? So be flexible and talk to folks, even if your trip is super planned. I would share what you're going to do with people, whether it's the hotel staff, lodging staff, or your tour guide, or see what they say.
Right. And be open. I mean, I oftentimes too, I'm very much a planner. I love the
Mhm.
planning process like Cindy does too, but it's like once I get to somewhere, I mean, just walk in and you have that ability to be like, hey, what would you do? Or to, where did you see some great fall trees? Or I'm looking for, something historic, and ask the locals. Oftentimes opportunities present themselves that weren't in the guidebooks that you didn't
Yeah,
expect, and you want to take advantage of those. And sometimes you won't. Sometimes you're like, no, I need to make time to go do X. I have my heart set on that, because
right.
you don't want to come back from your trip and have that woulda, shoulda, coulda thing happen
Right.
as much
Right.
as possible.
Yeah, and you can use your plans as a starting out point for conversation by just, like if you're at a restaurant, you can tell your server like, hey, later we're going to go to this museum. Have you ever been there? And then they might just go, oh no, that's a waste of time, or no, you should go, but right outside around the corner is the best like food truck. You should do that,
Yeah,
right? So using even your plans, even if they are flexible, as a communication point to share with people, just tell them what you're thinking about doing. And oh, we know when we're here, we really wanted to go see here. Have you ever been there? You'll get a lot of tips for, oh, don't go on a Tuesday, or, make sure you get there before noon,
exactly.
or those kinds of things. So your locals are helpful, even if you're not searching for things to do. Don't shy away from like
Right.
interacting with those folks.
Right.
That's really helpful. Um,
And that's what I think we're both saying too, is don't shy away from asking, even though you have kind of your plans, because you will get better tips as far
mhm,
as time of day to go, maybe where to park or how to get there,
right. Yeah.
things that you weren't aware of.
Yeah. And then I know we mentioned reviews, but that's very important to check those to see what's happening. Look those up, see and cross check them, make sure the review on the site and the site are consistent.
Oh, I agree. Yes. So I think in wrapping it all up, we pretty much shared that, choosing your purpose, who you're traveling with, how long, your budget, and where. And
Right.
then when you're going to book, do the airfare activities. If it's something you need a ticket for a festival, grab that. Then drop in your lodging, and then then you've got the makings of a great trip. So,
You do, yeah. And you can reach out to April and I. We're happy to help you and navigate that if you got some plans you're brewing. And also our travel community, the Travel Collective on Facebook is a great place. You can just drop in your question. There's lots of
oh
travelers there and
yeah.
travel providers as well, both that are more than willing to share their knowledge and experience with you. So, and if you're planning something, we want to hear about it. So
Yeah,
tell
we
us where you're
definitely,
going and
yeah. And
how we can
definitely
help.
check out that Facebook group, because there's travelers that have been so many of these places, and they're
Amazing.
so excited to share their past experiences, their tips, their
Yeah.
what they love to do, what they didn't love to do. So reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And our website is the-travelcollective.com. We've got interactive events and coffee chats. Again, make use of the other travelers that are excited to share.
Yep. All right. Talk to you all